Join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Director McGlynn, will you please give us the invocation?
We gather together here today, content on doing good work. We seek to represent fairly and well those who have given us this task. May our efforts be blessed with insight, guided by understanding and wisdom. We seek to serve with respect for all. May our personal faith give us strength to act honestly and well in all matters before us. Amen.
Thank you. Roll call.
Director Aguilar?
Present.
Director Creighton?
Here.
Director Espinoza?
Present.
Director McGlynn?
Here.
Director Lord? Here. Director Murphy?
Here.
Director Pereira?
Here.
Director Silvera? Director Rialta?
Here.
Director McDaniel?
Present.
Director Oliveira?
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Thank you. Item 4, approval of agenda. This is an action item.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could just make one point of clarification that the dates on item 6 for the minutes are erroneous. Instead of April 18th, it should be the date of May 16th. The attachment of the minutes are correct. It's just simply the wrong date listed on the agenda description.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item 5, public comment. Anybody wishing to step up to the microphone for public comment? Seeing no one. Item 6, approval of the minutes. We have a motion.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item 7, Citizens Advisory Committee report. Jack Jackson.
Good afternoon. The Citizens Advisory Committee met on Friday, June the 7th. There were 6 action items identified on the agenda today as 15, 16, 17, 18, 23, and 24. Presentations were made to the Citizens Advisory Committee with no concerns with regard to each of these aforementioned items. However, there was not a quorum present for the CAC meeting. Consequently, a recommendation could not be made on any of these action items. If there are any questions or comments, this completes my report.
Any questions for Mr. Jackson?
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 8, these are for information and discussion only. Item 8 is the Merced County Regional Waste Management Authority monthly update and the Merced County Regional Waste Management Authority financial report for July through March 2019. Any information or discussion on item 8?
Yes, I
Oh.
have slides.
Just Troy, he has a couple of slides for that item.
The orange one first, please. Thank you. Okay, just kind of want to follow up on something that's been going on a while, the Billy Wright landfill expansion. Do we want to buy the property just north, or is there a better suited site somewhere nearby where we would not lose customers and inconvenience customers that are currently coming to Billy Wright? So we basically looked at 3 area locations where there was still traffic infrastructure. We wouldn't have to build a whole new road or overpass or something. So we looked at the Dos Palos Y, we looked at Santanella, and then we looked down at the south end of Los Banos. And then you can see that not the exact location, but in each of those boxes there were multiple properties considered that had a large enough capacity. I'm sorry.
This is item 10.
I think you're on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was confused by the agenda. So which one is 8? This is part of the oral report. I'm sorry, is that a separate, we put that as a separate item? Okay, is it okay if we cover this, or do you want me to come back to this?
I say go.
I'm out of sequence. I apologize about that. So we looked at multiple properties that were large enough to accommodate a landfill, and then we looked at secondary issues. For example, is there water? Is there structures or farming on the property that would be difficult to interfere with? And kind of narrowed it down from there. And so we ended up with, of all these locations, the only one that actually had potential value was the Santanella region. And then we dug down into a little bit more detail and looked at the cost. And one of the properties there was going to be an estimated value between 10 and 12 million, whereas the area just north of Billy Wright landfill is between 7.6 and 9. And additionally, the more expensive property in Santanella actually has some structures on it, and so if you were to condemn, you would have to condemn it or have a impact to the current owner, and there's nothing built on the area just north of Billy Wright. So basically, to summarize that, to say, of all the properties that we looked at that looked accommodating, the best value for the authority would be the area just north of Highway 50, Billy Wright. Not to mention the fact that in the last 12 years, we've known of only one landfill's been permitted in California that we know of. And so permitting a new site is very difficult, whereas just extending the boundary of a site is much more permittable and less resistance to that. So going forward, our recommendation is that if you pursue expansion at Billy Wright landfill in Los Banos area, it should probably be that area just to the north, the 600 acres just to the north. So are there any questions or comments about that?
Mike?
Thank you, Brooks. So what are our next steps today if we'd like to do something? Because this can has been kicked down the road for, a decade, and we know that we're going to have to expand. And the nice part is we're making money off of Los Banos and 59 because we're able to take in extra refuge, but we're eating up airspace. And there's always an equal and opposite reaction. And so could a motion be made today to start the investigation of the purchase of the property?
Yeah, and I think that's what, I would just ask for direction. I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, this is an informational item only. It would have to be agendized to have any vote on it.
Okay. There's an oral report.
Yeah, and I may be stating that wrong. What I would think you would want to do is,
Direction on the next steps. Yeah.
He's on item 8.
you would want to
on 10.
receive this, and then we can bring back an agenda item saying, do you want us to actually create a project to do that? Would that be okay, Emily? They could just direct us to further investigate the Billy Wright expansion to the property to the north, and then we would put in an actual agenda item together next month. Would that be the proper way to handle it?
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Okay.
Paul, I think Paul has a...
Paul?
High technology here. So the agenda item reads oral report regarding property investigation for information and board direction on next steps. I think, as Los Banos said, we need to not kick the can down the road. It's just going to get more expensive. We're probably never going to get another additional landfill. So I think the board should give maybe not exact direction to purchase, but bring it back and the steps needed to execute. Then my next question is, the funding on this, can you also include that, how we're going to fund this?
Yes, and that would be my next comment, is that it's going to take a while to do this. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Emily.
I apologize. The next step would be to get an appraisal for this property because we cannot pay more than the appraised value as a public agency, and we have had issues with the current property owner wanting more for this property than anyone thinks that it's worth. So I think the first step that the board should take is to authorize us to proceed with an appraisal and then go from there.
Can that be done today?
Sure. Yes.
Comment on the legal counsel's, the perceived value. I don't know what the values are, what they're talking about, but there's a cost also to try to do say we can't come to an agreement, it's higher than the appraised value. It would be quite a bit more expensive to try to do a new landfill somewhere else, so there's a value to that. Is there a nexus that we could put?
At this point, no. You would need to get the appraisal and then proceed with negotiations with the landowner. That would be a bridge that we would have to cross once we have a better idea of where we stand in that regard. What we believe the value to be and what the landowner has currently requested, they're drastically different.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But to follow up on the funding, no, we've just left a blank in the budget that shows in the future we would probably want to consider expansion of the site, but there's no dollar amount and there's no funding of it yet. But what we would do is bring an agenda item back to you that says that we would pursue it, and then in next year's budget we could start setting aside money. And in the next it would take a while to do this. So in the next few years, we could just set aside some money each year of the budget to start funding it. That would be my suggestion.
How do we know that?
Director Villada.
Yes, the attorney said today it would be okay for a motion to go forward with an appraisal. So I would like to put that in the form of a motion that we go forward with the appraisal on the land.
Okay, sounds good.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just, what's the acreage on parcels?
This one, the one immediately to the north, I think is 608.
Yeah, that's a good amount. Yeah.
And to me, you would just want to buy that whole thing because then you would have a nice buffer between there and the I-5 and 152 and not having any issues of an adjacent landowner, basically.
Okay.
Second.
I'll second. Oh,
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And now you can give us the financial report.
Okay, get me back on track. Okay, we don't have a slide on this, but if you flip to page 20 of your packets, that shows the quarterly, the third quarter of the year. And so you'll see that as of 3 quarters, we've met 96% of the estimated revenue. And so our profit for this year is looking at going to be over $7 million. And that includes that we not only pay for today's operating expenses, we put aside money for fleet replacement and landfill expansion. So that's true additional revenue that you can put towards capital projects next year and the year following. So again, staff are doing a great job, really doing well, and financially, that's the result of it. Any questions about the finances?
Okay, no questions. Thanks, Brooke. Okay, now we'll go to item 9, the oral report from HF and H Consultants regarding the recycling contract.
I think he still has his monthly update.
Yeah,
Oh, you must,
I had a couple more updates, but is that after this? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Says
We're
the
off
financial
a little
report.
bit, but we'll move on. He hasn't given his monthly update yet. He had that. Item 10 was considered first, essentially, and we're
Right.
now on item 8A.
Okay.
We've already considered 8B.
So can we put back that?
Yeah.
I'll just catch you up to speed on a couple last things. I'm sorry. Obviously, I didn't reorganize this to match the numbering of the agenda, so I apologize for that. So we do have a design for, and not that you can really make this out, but this is the new inbound scale system and outbound scale system at Highway 59. You know, we have backups, especially on Saturday mornings, and it's just a difficulty with where the building is, but the building's too expensive to move, so we're going to have to make some other adjustments. So basically what can happen, though, is this is the tear lane with commercial vehicles. This is the one that everybody uses now, and then there's an outbound, and that's all there is. So what we're proposing now to do is put in another scale here and then extend the bypass lane all the way back to the wheel wash. So if you've ever been to the site, it's a couple hundred yards back. So customers who are waiting to weigh out or have to wait to get out because they have a tear weight and they don't need to wait on the scale, they can drive around and get out much quicker. And then we're going to have a red light, green light system similar to when you pull up to a toll booth, and you can tell which lanes are open and which lanes are closed. So when you pull up to Highway 59, we'll have 3 lanes in. They'll all be green, and then when all that customer traffic gets inside the landfill and is dumping, then they'll switch and we'll have 2 or 3 out, and they'll be red on the way in. And so customers can pull up and know which lane they're in and drive in and out, and it would speed things up tremendously, or it'll improve the situation. So there's the outbound. So we're going to have, again, instead of just one option now, you'll have 3 scales and a bypass lane. So we think it's a really good design, and it was budgeted last year. We're just showing you the actual design of it. So this will be constructed maybe this fall. It'll be done if everything goes well. And then 6B is the new construction at Highway 59. And so that's that's the base of the landfill, the very bottom of the existing. So the hole is basically dug. And so then they can start putting liner in. And then this is where we're stockpiling it over at the phase 5. So this area still has to be closed, and we have to put soil over the top. So rather than just excavate the soil and stockpile it, we had them move it to the area where we need to use it to put additional soil on this cell and close it for good. We've kind of postponed this, waiting for the valley fill to be approved. And so if the gas wells work that we're installing, we'll go forward. And here's the flare. Recall that the gas collection system has a vacuum on it, and those motors that create that vacuum are called a blower. And one of those failed, and we were down to 1. And so when we started to look at what it would take to fix that one, we ended up just purchasing a 3rd one. This slot was vacant. It didn't have a motor there. And so there it is with the motor installed, and it is fully functioning now. So this was kind of an emergency. And so we'll bring back to you next month the total cost. It's going to be somewhere over the $100,000 mark, but I don't know exactly how much. But we've got redundancy. We got the repair done. We've got redundancy. And hopefully if we can pursue the gas to energy project, this 3rd blower would be important to having the capacity to extract the gas and send it to the UC. So multiple benefits of this. The 38 gas wells at Highway 59 are going in. Hopefully it's going to be on time. They've been a little bit slow, but I think it's still okay at this point. Billy Wright Scale and Scale House, I mentioned to you last month that we had a contractor that did not perform well. So we've asked Tetra Tech to step in, and they've already given us a proposal. So we'll be getting a design to you in the next couple of months of what the improvements there. Remember, there's only 1 scale at Billy Wright, and it's in and out on the same scale. So we'll have 2 scales there. And the gas to energy project, we did an interface application with PG&E. We're working on the financial analysis so you can decide whether it's financially feasible or not. But the big thing is that the CEQA document, the environmental review, was released last Friday, and so that's out on the street. Again, we don't know of any significant impacts to the environment. In fact, we just know of the terrific 100,000 tons a year of less emissions going out. And then one of the big questions that came up more recently was the road widening of Bellevue Road, especially from G to the UC campus. And the city is going to do that project in some kind of partnership with the UC. And so would the pipeline will go in first, so would there be an issue with the city trying to get that widening done with the pipeline? And so we've met with the engineer, and they say no. The pipeline will be buried deep enough and be structurally sound that if it has to go over the top, it can go over the top, and there won't be any additional expense for the project or for the road widening. There should be no impact at all. And it is one of those things that if there would be, it's meant to last decades, but if there were an issue, you potentially would have to, what you see now, excavate and repair, but that would be 30, 40, 50 years down the road. The pipe's going to be a durable, thick material, and it's going to be buried and compacted well, so shouldn't be any conflicts with that whatsoever. But of course, if we know where the road's going, we'll put it beyond where the road would be if we can. But if not, it can still be paved over, and it won't be in interference with that. So I hope that addresses any questions anybody has on that. And Stacy is very up to speed on this, I think, at this point. And so what's going to happen in the next few steps is we're going to get the engineering design done to the bid process, and we can bring back quotes to you of what the construction cost will actually be, because that's the biggest single component, is that construction cost. And then if the finances look good and you are comfortable, then we can proceed with the power purchase agreement, the actual contract with the UC, and then you can sign that, and then we'll actually start the project. So any questions about the gas to energy project?
Yeah, just one. If I remember right, the state won't allow us to do the generation at the landfill, and so we're doing it at the UC. Is that correct?
It would be more expensive because they would tie those emissions back to us, and if we do it at the UC, they won't. And the other thing is we don't have any way to get the electricity over there because we couldn't use PG&E's power lines or pipeline.
Okay.
So we did investigate that first. We make the electricity right at the landfill and just put it on the grid. Don't pay for the pipeline. But the Air Board and PG&E are not in favor of that.
Any other questions? Is that it? We don't.
That's it. Well, I'll be speaking probably a little bit on the HF&H discussion too. So
Right.
I'll.
Yeah, we're moving on to that.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, yeah, we're moving on to HF&H. Gonna brief us on the new recycling contract.
And I guess I could introduce Rob Hilton.
Yeah.
He's the president of HF&H, which is a expert in recycling, all things recycling related. And so we had the question of the contract amendment from Republic, who currently takes our recyclables to their plant and processes them, sorts them, and ships them to a buyer. And so they wanted some increases, and so we asked a consultant to come in and help guide us through that process. And then there's also the issue of going forward, the recyclables are not generating enough revenue to pay for the hauling and processing. So there's some, and this is the way it used to be, the contract we had prior to this is the way we always had to pay a little bit. Now we've profited a little bit now, and now we're having to pay a lot more. So Rob is going to just give you some information on that contract and give you some advice moving forward. Okay.
Thank you, Brooks, and thank you, Board, for having me today. As Brooks said, my name is Rob Hilton. I'm with HF&H Consultants. We're a small consulting firm focused on California, and we work exclusively for local government agencies. So we have no conflict of interest with Republic, who's putting this proposal on the table. So as Brooks indicated, we were asked to take a look at the proposal from Republic to revise the recycling arrangements that you have and make a presentation to the TRB as well as your board with our recommendation about that. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of a background on diversion regulations that sort of sets up why we're doing this. Talk to you about the status of the recycling markets, basically what's changed and why has this come about. Talk to you about what other communities are doing about it, and you've probably seen in the paper and on the news some of the responses. And then I'll dive into, what was Republic's proposal, what do I think of it, and what do I think you ought to do. Excuse me. So I'll start with, you all started recycling in this county, at least, because of the requirements of AB 939. In 1989, the state required every city and county in the state to develop plans to achieve a 25% recycling rate, diversion rate by 1995 and 50% by 2000. When you did that, you set up plans, you decided how you were going to go about that, and you did generation studies that estimated what quantities were being generated in your community, and of that, what was being disposed. I'll get back to that in a minute because it's sort of important to this later discussion. For about 20 years, they were very focused on the accounting. Did you get to your 25%? Did you get to your 50%? And that was how they looked at things. In 2008, they modified that. And what they said was, yeah, your numbers are nice. We hope that you're getting there. But what we really care about is your implementation of programs. And so you signed up back in 1989 to 1993 for a bunch of programs that your community would participate in. The state now wants to hold you accountable for that. Many of you said you were going to do recycling programs either then or subsequently. And so the state compliance approach is to look at, do you have those programs? Then in 2011, they added a mandatory recycling law for businesses and multifamily. In 2014, they extended to those same folks a mandatory organics policy. And then in 2016, they passed SB 1383, which I think you've heard a little bit about, but it really is the next generation of AB 939. It's going to require us to get most of the organics out of landfills and sort of do for organics what we've been doing with recycling. It's also going to require a number of other things from your communities, including mandating and enforcing upon people that aren't participating in the recycling system. And that's true of both recyclables, which have paper organics in them, and traditional organics like yard trimmings or food scraps. So when we look back to that picture in 1989, you created these generation studies and you estimated how much is going on. Your county, like many valley counties, benefited from a whole lot of what's called source reduction. Essentially, your farms were generating, and packing houses and things, were generating a whole lot of waste that never went to a landfill. It was repurposed on site, other things were done with it. And so uniquely in the Central Valley, the profile of diversion looks like this. Essentially, you've got about a 50% diversion rate currently. Of that, this light green is all the source reduction credit you're getting. This little sliver of blue is the recycling you're doing in the blue can programs in those 3 cities. And the green is the green waste collection programs that are happening in almost all of the communities. So important context that while you have to recycle because of the program requirements of the law, it's really not contributing a whole lot to your diversion picture. Most of the diversion is happening because of that source reduction. So what happened with the recycling markets? Many of you will remember the Beijing Olympics, and you had decathletes and runners and things saying, I can't compete. The air quality is so bad, I can't hardly breathe. And during the Olympics, it sort of looked like this. And China was quite embarrassed by that. They are a developing nation. They want to be a developed nation, and they want to get a control on pollution in their own country. So they implemented what they called Blue Sky. And it was a series of policies that were aimed at cleaning up the country. They went sort of industry by industry, and sure enough, the waste paper industries and waste plastic industries caught the attention of some regulators. There were over 700 factories in China that were shut down because they were polluting for various reasons. On top of that, they identified that the source of pollution was waste that was imported largely from the US and Europe. So they said, okay, we're going to implement a policy. They issued a notice to the World Trade Organization, and they said, we're going to implement a contamination standard of 0.5% by weight contaminants in any bale of recyclables that comes over here. And they warned us about that in 2017, and they implemented it in March of 2018. So we've had about a year of the full implementation of this, and they're quite serious. There have been loads impounded there, rejected, shipped back to other places. So it's really disrupted the markets. These graphs, I've got one on plastic, which is this one, and the next slide on paper, show how the dynamic has shifted over the last year. So here, China was receiving the vast majority of scrap plastic from all sorts of different countries. Within a year, they went down to be about the smallest. In fact, I think they are, other than the African nations, the smallest receiver of waste plastic of any country in the world just in 12 months. That was a huge shift, and the displacement basically went to Malaysia, Vietnam, India, Taiwan, other Southeast Asian countries. Those countries do not have the capacity to take this stuff. They are now starting to shut down. They're starting to say, we're going to do what China did, and we don't have the capacity for this anymore. So there's a bit of a game of musical chairs going on with plastic particularly. Paper is a similar story. China shed about half of what it was receiving, and the half that it's receiving now is much higher quality. It's been cleaned up quite a lot. But again, all these other Southeast Asian countries have taken up that slack. So what does that mean? Economically, there's a difference in price. Because you don't have access to the largest market in the world, everybody else is willing to pay you a bit less. The other dynamic that's happened is we used to ship stuff to China in empty sea containers from all the stuff we bought from them and sent empty sea containers back. Our recyclables carpooled on those empty sea containers back to China. If you're not going back to China, you're now paying freight to go to one of these countries. So it changed the cost dynamic there as well. So this is what has happened to mixed paper over the last little more than 10 years. And you see there was a dip back in the Great Recession where markets crashed. But they crashed fairly briefly, and they did not go as deep as they've gone this time. This is the worst market for recyclables that we've ever seen. And it's more sustained, and everybody pretty well agrees that this is at least a 3 to 5 year outlook for depressed prices while we try to develop some infrastructure here to get things to a standard that they can be shipped. So all of this is sort of challenging when CalRecycle just issued 165 pages of regulation saying under 1383, not just the 3 cities that are doing it now, but the rest of you are probably going to have to sign up for these recycling programs. So what do you do? How do you make this work? Other communities have done a number of things. They've tightened up their lists. There was an arms race for who would accept the most recyclable materials, and companies competed over that. They've started to shed those lists and really reduce and hone in on the most recyclable materials to try and improve the quality standard. By doing that, you also get less collateral contamination. The less you tell people, when in doubt, put it in the recycling, the more accurate recycling they're going to do. There are inspections going on at point of collection, people lifting lids on containers to see how contaminated they are, to see if they'll collect them or not. In some communities, there are contamination charges being implemented. Huge investment statewide in public education and outreach around this. Some earned media because it's coming in the news quite a lot, but many of the large companies and even some of the haulers associations in California have been doing some advertising. Some, including Newbie Island, where you take your recyclables, have had to dispose of some recyclables because they weren't at the quality that they needed to be to market. It's been relatively small, the amount that's had to be disposed statewide because of this, but it has been happening. Some MRFs have gone to a load by load evaluation of the quality of your material, and they charge you based on that. So if you have grade A material, you might get, a $10 charge, but if you have bad material, they may be charging you over $100. That tends to be when you don't have a long-term pricing arrangement like you guys have. And then, as Republic has proposed, many communities are implementing processing charges or other modifications to the pricing system. Some of that's coming out as recycling surcharges, $1.50 or $2 on everybody's bill gets added as a surcharge. Kern County just adopted one right about 5%. So this is a real issue. There are a number of ways you could choose to deal with it. Republic's proposal is to add a recycling processing rate of about $104 per ton, that processing rate would be adjusted by 80% of the CPI, that the cost of that would be offset against any recyclable revenues that exist, which is sort of the deal that you have now. The transportation costs offset the commodity revenue. And then they propose to eliminate their requirement to conduct material composition studies, which are the things that sort of determine how much of what types of materials you have and what they pay you as a result. So the first thing we did was to cost that out and to look at a number of scenarios about how you might, if you decided to pay that cost, what would it be and how might it be related. In total, it works out to about $383,000 a year using last year's data. It works out to about $382,000 a year swing for the three communities combined. Again, that can be relayed in different ways. It could be as Republic proposed it and sort of as you have things now, based on tons processed for each of those agencies. If that's the case, you're going to see something between a $30 and a $40 swing in cost per ton. So that's one way you could do it. You could distribute it based on households. So if you think about it in terms of your ratepayers, it would be somewhere between 33 cents to a little over $1 per household, depending on how you do it. Or you could theoretically spread it over the rate base of the entire authority, and it would be 44 cents. Lastly, you could choose to put it into the cost of disposal. And so if you did that, it would increase the cost of disposal somewhere in the $2.40 to $5 range. So if you chose to incur this cost, there are options about how you'd pay for it. And we can come back to this slide later if you have questions about sort of how that shakes out. As we assess the proposal, with point one, the distinct processing rate is becoming the norm. In your next contract, you will pay one. That's sort of the reality that you're facing. Republic made this claim on the basis of the reduction in the revenue that they were receiving from recyclables, and the dollar amount that they're quoting here, roughly $104, is about what they've lost on recyclables. The two numbers tie pretty nicely. In fact, they may have lost a little bit more than that on revenue. What they're asking for is fairly reasonable, but it's on the higher end of what we see, at least in the Central Valley and Central Coast. If we include the Bay Area, they're sort of mid-pack in terms of the charges. The regional comps in the Bay Area are $90 to $180 a ton. In the Valley, you're seeing stuff in the $35, $55, $90 a ton range in Fresno and Bakersfield. And out on the Central Coast, you can get in for about $40 a ton. So while their number was sort of in the range that we're seeing, it was on the higher end. They asked to adjust the processing rate by 80% of the Bay Area CPI. Because they requested this based on their loss of commodity revenue, we don't think that's appropriate. We think that the indices that you have that track commodity values are the appropriate adjustment mechanism if what we're talking about is a loss of revenue from commodities. They proposed that they would offset the recyclable material revenues with the processing rate and the transportation. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's the sort of thing that you would do with this and how you manage the dollars. The last recommendation I don't agree with. They suggested eliminating the contractor's requirement to conduct the material composition studies, and I strongly believe that those composition studies are the exact information you need to be working with your communities about how to manage this issue. And so if you don't know how much contamination you have and what type of contamination you have, it's very difficult to do the public education and outreach to clean it up and to fix this problem. So my recommendation actually is that you would do more of them on a more statistically valid basis, not less. So what are your alternatives? You could continue with no change until the end of the term with Republic. It's about a year left, and rebid the services. There's some value to that. It would allow you to go out to the marketplace to see how reasonable this is as opposed to working with your sole provider currently. The downside is last year there were a couple of recycling RFPs that got no responses. Those were in the Bay Area, they weren't in the Valley, but it is concerning. Option two is that you could negotiate with Republic and perhaps others for some alternative terms to see how reasonable this is. Republic has offered that if you took this deal, they would extend your contract for at least a year, and perhaps they would do more if you sat down with them to talk about it. That may be difficult to value. If you just sit down and chat with a couple of different folks and you don't do a structured RFP process, it may be difficult for your board to understand, have we gotten apples to apples here, or are these different bases? Theoretically, you could also choose to suspend or terminate the recycling programs until the markets return. Nobody in the state of California has done that yet, and I think CalRecycle would probably be knocking on your door the next day with a compliance order, so I don't recommend it. Plus, Under SB 1383, this 165 pages right here, you're probably going to have to re-implement those programs again by 2022. And so pulling something back and then restarting it is a huge switching cost, and could be expensive and traumatic to the programs. So our recommendation is that you continue, burn out the rest of this contract on the terms that you've had. Republic has had a number of years of pretty good revenues under this contract, frankly. And so, if this was continuing on for several more years, I would be a little bit more concerned. But they did well for the front end of this. It wasn't so good at the end. And there are provisions in the agreement already that share this revenue risk back with you. In a sense, Los Banos is already paying something. The other agencies have lost a lot of what they were being paid. And so they've already been relieved of some of this. And again, rather than extending with them, I think you may be able to get a better deal through a local facility, or a facility at least that's not in the Bay Area, with Bay Area wages and those sorts of things, and a little bit closer to home for transportation costs might be helpful. So our recommendation is that you burn this out and that you begin immediately planning for an RFP process for the next contract for these services. And I really encourage that your staff go out and meet with potential proposers, tour their facilities, see how things are going. Some of these operators are doing better than others, and it'd be good to put eyes on them and see that, and it'd be good to talk to them about what are the business terms you're looking for, so that as you structure an RFP and you put a contract together, you have a better chance of getting good proposals back from the marketplace, and you don't run into that problem of having no proposals come back from the marketplace. So that concludes my report, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Any comments from the public? Okay, bring it back to the board. Any questions, discussion? Go ahead, Mayor Vallata.
Motion to accept the report and leave everything as status quo, burn out the contract, and then come back for a reassessment.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, we've already had Brooks' report, or do you want to have anything else to add on Billy Wright?
No, I just want to quickly say thank you very much. I really appreciate your support over the years. I think you guys have just been wonderful to me, and I've loved working here. It's been the best job I've ever had, and I say that with true intent, and I've just enjoyed my time here, and so I thank you very much. And I just would put a plug in that the staff at the landfills are really good people, and they have worked really hard. So I'd remind you that the revenue and all the good we've done has been on, their sweat equity. So just remember them going forward. You have a really good crew out there, and so I just want to give them a plug. But thank you very much.
No, I think we owe you a big thank you for fixing our waste management authority. You've done a great job, and I think everybody here would agree on it.
Yeah, well, now you get to hire a real expert. I'll free it up. You can hire somebody who really knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Brooks.
But thank you very much, and if you're ever in the San Luis area, please let me know, and I'll take you to lunch.
Yeah. A lot of people from the valley go to
temperature about every week in the summer.
A lot of people go to San Luis from the valley,
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sincerely.
And is it okay if I say a
Sure.
Yeah. Brooks, I just want to drive home the point of where this the Waste Management Agency was when you got here and where it is today, and the interesting thing, and I hope all of my colleagues up here appreciate this, is what you did in transforming that agency included working with the people that work there. And you didn't end up on the front page of the newspaper. And that, I have never seen anything like that. And that, I think, speaks to your character and your desire and your heart to work with the people and do what's right. And I just don't want that to go out of this room without being reiterated.
Or
And
iterated.
yeah. But anyways, it's just a phenomenal feat. I've never seen anything like that. And it was a pleasure to watch it happen.
Thank you.
Director Vallata.
Well, if you're on this board long enough, you get to see changes, positive and negative, and Brooks, you're a real positive. I very much appreciate your friendship and all the advice that you've given me over the years, and it's been for the good, very good. And thank you for what you've done on the west side, and now trying to ensure that it has a future, and you've laid the groundwork for that. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate everything.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, now we'll call up Caltrans, the juggernaut of transportation.
Brooks is a tough act to follow, so I'll just make mine short and sweet. This week, if you read your own local newspaper, you'll see a press release that we've started groundbreaking on the Santa Fe Olive intersection. Get that going. It's a little over $5.5 million worth of work going out to widen it, put in new signals, restripe it for safety, do some timing, make some pedestrian crossings. That intersection should be a great improvement when it's done. On the June 11th last week, we had a meeting with Merced County Public Works and the district staff to discuss the Plainsburg-Planada 140 intersection and what can be done out there. There was a long discussion. They're going to look at putting out some new signs, and they're going to continue that meeting and invite the Public Works directors to the executive meeting on July 11th, the partnership meeting that Dan has now started. Director Pereiro's dip on 99, you'll be glad to hear they finished that up this week, so your next trip should be nice and smooth, no dips. You can drink coffee all the way across, you're good. And pat on the back for the state and actually everybody in this room and the others. Caltrans is, the state of California was nominated as the third friendliest bicycle state in the nation. That's an improvement for us all. Improving bicycle use and safety and reducing air pollution, it's a good thing. Other than that, I have not purchased a landfill or done anything great to change the world, but I'm here to take any questions or comments you have.
Any questions?
Just a comment. Thank you very much for all the work. I know that I've constantly been bringing it up, but if you're ever around that corner there, they sell the best tacos there in the county, so be glad to buy you some.
Stop there, you're right.
Carnitas too. Carnitas too, so yeah, thank you very much for all your work.
Thank you.
Director Villaro.
Yes, and thank you for your contribution with the grant money that we received, the more than $500,000 from Caltrans for the two projects. And I'm happy to report that the West Side Committee has approved the Pioneer Project and the bike path. And so now if it's approved or ratified by this group, the money will be there up to right-of-way purchase for the Pioneer Project. And so then it's turned over to you because it'll be shovel ready.
It's okay,
So I'm expecting that $45 million in 6 years.
I'll keep playing the lotto. We'll see.
No, I want the Caltrans. I don't want the lotto. So, and the bike path, the money is there for that also. So we'll be starting on that project also. So we're looking forward for your support and guidance on those two projects.
Right, a lot of good news. That's great.
Thank you.
Director Murphy.
Just wanted to share my gratitude for the project that's happening right now in the city of Merced that you mentioned, and at Santa Fe and Olive. And thanks for incorporating feedback from our staff at City Hall on that project. That area of 59 is a real priority for us. And we've got a number of improvements that we'd like to see, and we're bringing money to the table locally as well. And even though it's not our road, it's a state highway, it's got a big role in our city, especially that side of the city for moving north south. So we've got some other things. I think we've always shared those with you, but just a reminder that the bridges that are a quarter mile or less north of there are a real priority for us, and then also just making the width of the road consistent. So consistently wide. Right now it's kind of in and out, narrow and wide. So, but thank you very much. We look forward to the project, and just in terms of what we can tell the public and in terms of expectations, when will that project be complete?
I'm drawing a blank. I don't.
Okay.
If I
Maybe you can follow
could be wrong. All I know is they're going to be starting work, and they'll do a lot of it at night. They're projecting about a 15-minute delay for those that insist on going through that intersection when they are doing it at work. But my understanding is they're going to try to do a majority of the work at night when they get started on it.
Yeah, I think they're already doing utility work out there, so appreciate it.
It'll take a
If you wouldn't mind following up and just let me know when they expect to be done. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 12, these items are for information and discussion only, items A through F. Is there any item director would like to comment on? Okay, we'll go on to item 13, transportation planning and Measure V updates. Matt?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just a fine print.
I guess we got to back up here for Sleepy Mike.
We just received
This one.
Oh, he was looking. Yeah.
Those mine.
We received some good news that through the efforts of Senator Caballero and Adam Gray, we have received $5 million for the building of a fire training facility in Los Banos. So, and we have some other money to put together, so it may be up to $7 million, and we'll be able to do the first phase of a county training facility for all the firefighters. So we're really excited about that. It's going to be located in Los Banos. Thank you. Thank you, Stacy.
Okay. Now we'll go on to item 13. Matt, transportation planning and Measure V update.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. A couple heads ups. Next week is the East Side Regional Projects Committee meeting on Wednesday at 1:30 in Livingston. So continuing the discussion from last meeting was pretty productive, and we think that, capitalizing on that momentum. So the West Side, as was mentioned, has already made their recommendation to this board. So when if the East makes a recommendation to this board, then we would bring all those to the board at one time. And if not, then we may bring the West and East separately, but we'll see how that goes. Also, next Wednesday is the last Measure V Roadshow, so we went out to all the councils, and next week's is in Dos Palos, Wednesday night, right before their council, and then a presentation at their council. So spreading the word to all the communities about promises being kept. I also wanted to mention, and I don't want to steal any thunder, but there's potentially some really good news for the City of Merced tomorrow. Strategic Growth Council, there is a staff recommendation to award some money to the City of Merced. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I think it's a pretty good chance that they will do so. So that would be a tremendous thing. So just to let you know that that's going on. And the City of Merced has been trying for years on this in a variety of ways for this program. So if this happens, it's going to be really great. And then also for the STIP, so the State Transportation Improvement Program, the state's going to be releasing their fund estimate next week. And so we're going to be kicking off the STIP process. So by November, the board has to submit the RTIP basically to the state, which becomes part of the STIP. And so we're going to kick off that process with a concept kind of outlining what it's all about and the process for moving towards November. So stay tuned for that next month. That concludes my update. If you have any questions, I could answer those for you.
Any questions? Okay, we'll move on to approve Amendment 2 for the Measure V expenditure plan.
Thank you. The expenditure plan does allow provisions for making amendments for exactly this sort of circumstance. So there's a single bullet line in the portion about the Citizens Oversight Committee that says that they're required to submit the financial disclosure statements to the State's Fair Political Practices Commission. But the Oversight Committee's responsibilities actually do not include any of those sorts of things. They don't make recommendations on financial. All they do is review expenditures that have already happened. So they don't have any sort of potential financial conflict or any of that sort of thing. So we're recommending that the board amend the plan to remove that. And then when we have Oversight Committee members, it would relieve them of having to fill out those paperwork, which doesn't apply anyway.
Okay, any public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back for a motion.
I'll motion to accept.
Okay, we have a motion to accept.
I second.
We have a second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Matt. Item 15, fiscal year 2018-19 Regional Surface Transportation Program distribution. We have 3 items to consider. Approve the apportionment, authorize staff to forward claims to the jurisdictions, and we have a resolution to adopt. Ty?
Thank you very much. Regional Surface Transportation Program, RSTP. Originally, it's a federal funding source that gets apportioned to the regions every year. And because we're a small region, we're allowed to exchange it, basically wash it for state-only dollars with the state Caltrans. So we've done that already. The washed out money is in our account. And basically, we're just looking for the board to approve the apportionment distribution and then permit staff to start collecting the claims from the jurisdictions and authorize the payments of those funds. And normally, this comes to the board as a consent item.
Motion approved.
I'll second.
Is that for item A, or do we got a A, B, and C all together? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Ty. And you're up again on the Exchange Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Funds.
Thank you again. This is the second time this has come up. It's come up before. It's a CMAQ exchange. The last time we went through an exchange with San Diego Association of Governments. That exchange has been processed successfully. There was a report that the state accounting office released like just a couple weeks ago, and it showed that it was processed already. So this item is proposing to do another exchange of $1.3 million of CMAQ that was programmed by the board to projects that are at risk for not being able to secure this year. So we're suggesting we do an exchange with another region, Sacramento, and they would pay us back the same amount next year. And it would preserve the funding from any potential impacts from our upcoming rescission.
Okay, any public comment? See none, bring it back to the board. We have to approve the exchange and authorize the director to execute it.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, item 17, California's Clean Air Act waiver and the proposed safe vehicle rule. We have Matt again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So air quality is always super complicated, but basically the federal government is proposing something called the SAFE rule, which will roll back national fuel economy standards for cars and light trucks. California has a waiver which allows California to have a higher standard there, and they're also proposing to remove that waiver. And that would cripple the state's efforts to improve air quality because the state relies on the ability to set higher standards so that they can do things like ZEV mandates, so zero emission vehicle mandates, and a bunch of other things. So if the proposed rule goes through, then not only will there be some broad-ranging effects on air quality in California, but it will also impact transportation projects, because transportation projects that get federal dollars have to go through what's called conformity. And there's a long planning process. The state does air quality plans, and then we have to do conformity to demonstrate that those projects don't make the air worse. So if all of the back end of that gets changed, all that has to be redone. That takes a long time. And in the meantime, potentially major projects, things like AME, 959 widening, the Livingston widening on 99, all those sorts of things could potentially face delays. So it could be very bad for implementation of transportation projects. And this is true throughout the state. And there are a few other states that are also impacted. And so it's not just the state, but it's also the automakers have also submitted comments and letters to the federal government to not do this. They also don't like it. And so basically what we're recommending is that the board take a position And then we can submit letters, support and work with CalCog and the other state agencies as they're trying to negotiate some sort of compromise, or basically try and push back against this. And if you have any questions, I can answer those. But basically, we're just we're looking for approve a resolution so that we can submit a letter and those sorts of things.
Any questions? Okay, I'll look for a motion to adopt the resolution taking a position in support of maintaining California's Clean Air Act preemption waiver. Do we have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Can
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Okay, shall we have a, what? Roll call vote. Mayor Murphy.
It'd be helpful for me to understand. I mean, there's clearly another side to the issue and some discussion about this.
Well, to be honest with you, Mike, I don't understand the issue fully. And, the thing that I'm concerned about is that California has environmental issues that supersede federal issues, and I don't understand it enough to know that I would support this resolution. I guess I didn't, and to be honest with you, I didn't see it on the agenda ahead of time, and I didn't call Matt and ask questions.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I think what's important, and this is a complicated topic, I think what is important is the implication that without this waiver, the true impacts on us regionally are compromising federal funding if we are not able to attain our meet air quality conformity. This waiver is critical in that, because if a standard is set here at the national level and California has the ability to set it here, it means that we're able to have a higher standard that allows us to achieve those benefits to our air quality. And if we don't have that waiver, then there's a gap in our air quality emissions reductions that we're going to have to try to figure out in some other way. And if that doesn't happen, then it jeopardizes our ability to have federal funding on our projects that could impact the progress of those federally funded projects in our region if we're out of air quality. And I kind of probably butchered it, but that was, I figure you're probably thinking along the same lines I am, and so that's the way. Without the waiver is changing the status quo. If they take away the waiver, it means we can't do business as we always have been, and it jeopardizes our federal funding for our projects because we won't be able to get our air quality conformity. And I think all the MPOs, if not, I think all the MPOs are opposing this.
CalCog is taking the lead on opposing, and they've asked for all of the MPOs to do this, so that's why we're bringing it to the board in a specific fashion, because CalCog can and does take these positions on behalf of all the MPOs, and they've already done so, but they asked for each MPO to also take action so that there would be a longer list of opposition. But the transportation part is true, but it's also California's ability to meet the air quality goals just within the valley, for example, in Southern California. That's the other impact. But to this board, the transportation projects are also potentially being impacted.
Would this impact Livingston's widening project on 99? Southbound?
It could impact the southbound. It could impact the southbound. It wouldn't impact the northbound because that's set to go. They already have all their federal approvals. But the southbound, which is coming up in a couple of years.
And any other federalized projects?
Anything with federal dollars, right. So the southbound 99 is a key example of a project that if this takes a year or 2 or 3 years for California to figure out how to respond to, that project would get caught in the lurch and would would suffer a delay of a year or 2 or 3. Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Director McDaniel.
So the way I'm looking at this, so we can meet the federal standard, but we won't get the funding if we can't meet the state standard, which is much higher. That's where I'm taking a stand. It's like, if we're going to compete, let's compete for these dollars equally throughout everywhere with the same standards. So we're trying to compete for federal dollars without the same standards as everybody else.
California is able to meet the federal air quality emission standards for PM 2.5 and ozone because California has been allowed to have a stricter standard for fuel economy and fleet rules.
It's how we're able
That's
to.
how we're meeting
'Cause we're
public health air quality standards, is by having much tighter regulation on stationary sources and some of the mobile sources.
So the opposite of that would be if we if we weren't allowed to have a higher standard in California, then the opposite would happen, where we would likely not meet the national standard.
We would not meet the national standard for air quality, and we'd have to come up with other things, and those other things would definitely be more onerous. So it wouldn't necessarily be no drive days, but it would be things more than what's going on now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director Velazquez.
I'm sorry.
Comment?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
I don't think I like this as much as, some of you, but not just because it's Livingston, but any other project that we might lose in the county. So I'm willing to vote yes.
On purpose to get you all riled up.
Yeah, but I'm willing to vote yes on this one because, like I said, it's California, and no matter what, as electeds, we have to move forward. And, I know that everybody has their opinion, but, we're in California, and the states can do what they're going to do. We're not up there, to vote on that, so they're going to, if we vote that way, I guess we'll be axed out of projects or things. So I'm not, I don't want to lose that, especially in our county that we have so much need. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes. Oh.
Let's go with Director McGlynn.
Just to state my opinion and reasons for support, I did attend the technical review board, listened to all the conversations and the presentation. It seemed quite clear to me at that point it could impact our funding. And outside reading, I have concerns with environmental issues and also a concern of self-determination by our own state and state rights. And I think this is an attempt by the current administration to trample upon those rights. So those are my reasons for support.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I asked twice. Thought you were looking up the line. Matt, you mentioned that the automotive makers are supporting the maintaining the waiver as well.
Right.
And do you know why?
I do.
That's counterintuitive to me.
I don't know. There is a letter that they've provided.
Yeah, no worries.
Not know exactly what that is, but I think it's at least partly because of the disruption to the industry. They're doing things the way they're doing things already, and so they would have to. It would be quite a turn to not be doing things. They're already providing a lot of cars. There's a lot of states that follow the California standard. So it's not like there's cars provided to California and then cars provided to 49 other states. A lot of the California standard cars are going to a lot of the other states.
Countries.
Yeah, and other countries too.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, I guess we proceed with the roll call vote.
Director Aguilar?
Yes.
Director Creighton?
Yes.
Director Espinoza?
Yes.
Director McGlynn?
Yes.
Director Lohr? Director Murphy?
Yes.
Director Pereira?
Abstain.
Director Silvera, Director Villalta,
I'll also abstain.
Director McDaniel,
Nay.
Director Oliveira,
Yes.
motion carried.
Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, now we can move on to item 18, local transportation fund apportionment for fiscal year 2019 and 2020. Matt?
Thank you. The local transportation fund is from 1/4 cent of the state sales tax, and it comes back to the counties, comes to this board to apportion. And that's according to the state rules, which is in the Transportation Development Act, which is also what controls the unmet needs process, which is something that the board did last year. This year, there's $7.75 million, and the apportionment that we're recommending is shown on the second page of the staff report. So basically, of the 7.75, off the top, the auditor takes their administrative cost, and then MCAG's administrative expense, as identified in the budget, is the $81,000, and that's basically running the unmet needs process and those sorts of things. And then MCAG can take a planning portion, and so that's 3%, and this is actually a reduction from some previous years. And then the transit agency and YARTS have their operating needs, and so they submitted those claims. And then there's a reserve for passenger rail, which this board did that last year, and we're recommending a 5% amount this year, which would be $387,000, and that would add to the $400,000 from that was set aside last year. And the idea behind that is simply to build up a reserve of LTF in case this board decides that they want to use it. At any time, the board could decide that they don't want to use it and they want to use it for something else instead. But if the situation arises where the board decides, or the board has an opportunity to, or the board is asked to provide match for rail, as rail is coming to Merced, if you don't have anything, then you can't provide that match. But if you have a rail reserve, then you would at least have the ability to provide some match for something. So it's kind of an opportunity in case something like that comes up, and that could come up. It might not come up for a few years. So, but in the meantime, you'd be building up a tool that you could use. Let's say you had $2 million, you might be able to get 5 or 10 million from that, or who knows. And again, at any time, the board could decide to use that LTF in other ways. So anyway, that's one of the highlights. Is that's a question. Is do you want to have that reserve? So staff's recommending that on the same basis as last year. And then the $621,000 after all those items is available to be distributed to the 7 jurisdictions for street and road maintenance. And so that's done on a population basis. So this is very similar to what we do every year. It's just the amounts might be different for the transit, for example, and then the passenger rail is something that was new last year. And if you have any questions, I can answer those for you. But otherwise, that's what the staff recommendation is the apportionment schedule shown here.
Any questions? If not, I'll look for a motion to adopt the resolution to approve it and authorize staff to forward the claim forms to the jurisdictions.
Also move, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion?
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item 19, authorized contract for multi-location information technology support and maintenance. Nav.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the board. Our current contract with the IT provider expires on June 30th. Staff is seeking board approval to enter a new contract with the incumbent IT provider, Apex Technology. They provide service to MCAG, TJPA, and RWA, and the amount to not to exceed $419,000 for 3 years. The current contract maintains the same level of service. Actually, the new contract maintains the same level of service as the current contract. The only change for the new contract is special projects. Special projects are projects that are outside the package and are not anticipated. Staff has learned from historical events, trying to be fiscal prudent with the new contract. Example of a special project is the installation of antennas on the current operation and maintenance building. The work was outside Apex scope of work, so staff brought a contract for amendment to the board, which was approved back in September 2018. That $20,000 for each year will not be rolled over. If it doesn't expend, we will leave it as is, but that $20,000 will not be rolled over to next fiscal year. So if we don't utilize it, it just stays as is. Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, bring back to the board. Looking for a motion to authorize the executive director to enter into the contract.
Question, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair?
Director Murphy.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with this contract. I just, a request, I didn't see in the staff report where the other options were listed.
The other contracts?
Yeah, the other bidders or other options out there.
Yes, there were 2 other bidders.
Yeah, so it'd be helpful for me in terms of making a decision to see those, their names and what their bids were. So, okay.
Do you want me to? So we have historically not included it in because of the board's authority is on giving the authority to actually spend the money, and we do an evaluation process that involves internal and external partners. So the action or the authority of the board for action is to give me the authority to expend the money for the service, and is intentionally excluded from the decision of the actual vendor that's chosen. And I think that's a little bit different of a role than the councils or the board have when exercising contracts. But I look to council if I misstated that.
That's true. This board does differ slightly from your local councils and the Board of Supervisors. It is primarily a policy board, and that information has never been included in board packets. It's certainly available to board members if you'd like to call and request it.
I guess my question is, why not just include it? Is there any harm? You're saying we couldn't choose someone else, but we could choose not to fund the recommendation. I just think it's helpful information to have, but maybe it's just me.
I would leave that up to the rest of the board.
Well, can we vote on that or give direction on it?
You can give direction on it.
Well, Mr. Chair, could I just add in, going through the busing and the other stuff with the contracts, and I'm sure the mayor or Director Villalta can attest that it gets a little in depth in discussions and a whole lot of different opinions, and sometimes stuff never gets accomplished whenever we bring up the multiple contracting to this board.
Having gone through this a number of times, we've, I think in transparency, yes, his supervisor, Director McDaniel's assessment is correct, and so also Mr. Murphy. And I think we rely on staff to bring us the best available knowledge that they can. But I think as transparency and for background information, I think we should all have that information. But then staff makes the recommendation. That's why we hire you. And you're going to sort through all the proposals, and you're going to come up with the best recommendation that you can to bring forward for us to approve. And I think we need to rely on that. But I think having the background information, either in part brought to each member or in the packet, would be good. And I have no preference if it's going to be in the packet, fine, or if a member requests it and would just like it, and going forward, any bids that come forward, those members may request that just ahead of time and just say forward it to us. So I'm just trying to make amends for both things and trying to please everybody, but I think that's probably the best way to go.
Yes, Director Craig.
I agree with Mayor Murphy. You can't go wrong with information. I think the public needs that. We need that. You still have the authority to do what you have to do, but we need to see what you're doing in your train of thought, how you get there, because ultimately we're responsible for everything.
Any other comments? Do you think you got any direction out of that? You did?
I'll just, it sounds like in the background section of the staff reports, we can list the proposals received and the dollar amounts. I think it would also be incumbent upon staff to make sure that in that discussion we also offer an explanation of the evaluation criteria so that it doesn't appear that it's just basically on dollar amounts, that there are other evaluation criteria. And then in our action that we're requesting that it be just as we have it now, where it's specific to requesting a dollar amount for that contract as opposed to the vendor and the dollar amount. So that I think is a way we can balance. The information will be there in the background section, but it won't be part of the action itself. It would just say, just like how we do it now, authorize a contract in X amount for these services.
Okay, let's get back to authorizing the director to enter into a 3-year contract. Do I hear a motion?
Also move.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item 20, authorized contract for audit services. Nav?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our current contract as well as expires on June 30th. Staff is seeking a board approval to enter a new contract for audit services not to exceed $205,000. The current contract was selected to Hudson Henderson, a company out of Fresno. The current proposal is significantly lower than the incumbent by $90,000 for the over 3 years. Staff is seeking approval for the executive director to enter a contract for 3 years not to exceed $205,000.
Any discussion?
So this contract, if this is approved, is $90,000 less than the current contract?
Over 3 years, correct.
Over 3 years. Okay, and not the same company, different company.
Different company.
Different company.
The current company, after 5 years, they can't bid on the current contract.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, do I have a motion? We have a motion.
Second.
And a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Item 21, Clean Energy Staff Report. Stacy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item was put on the agenda at the request of several of the board members at last board meeting following a presentation from Peninsula Clean Energy. I won't go into all of their presentations since it was just last month, but the general direction that we were given were to kind of bring back an assessment of what the next steps would be and what it would involve. And I've done that starting on page 111 of your staff of the board packet. Generally, I think just to keep it short, what we're talking about is these 3 different roles in providing electricity in terms of generation, delivery, and usage. The idea of community choice aggregation is just talking about that generation piece. So the generation of your electricity or your energy would either be generated or purchased by a JPA like Peninsula Clean Energy, or if we were to, the region were to, or any of the jurisdictions were interested in this program. The delivery piece is still in PG&E, still use her transmission line, they still do customer service. And then at the end, the end user benefits from what they're proposing as being a reduction in rates that is generally about 5% below PG&E for electricity. So in terms of kind of the organizational framework of how this would work, it could be any of the jurisdictions or any group of jurisdictions that could either choose to create a new joint powers authority to develop a community choice aggregation program here, or you could choose to join an existing JPA. I did ask the question if there was a critical threshold for end users, meaning did you have to have 100,000 homes or what that number was, and there is no critical threshold, so not all of the jurisdictions would have to participate if they didn't want to, or any single jurisdiction could do this on their own if they wanted to pursue the program. the relationship again to PG&E and MID, this would just be available for PG&E customers. So any residences or commercial businesses in the MID service area would not be part of this JPA arrangement. So in terms of next steps, the next step is primarily to confirm, first to assess any interest at the jurisdictional level, but it's to confirm with Peninsula Clean Energy that there's an interest in the partnership to do a feasibility study. They did offer to contribute $50,000 in funding for a feasibility study, so as long as there was a local contribution of $10,000. And then to get the feasibility study underway, any jurisdiction that would be interested in pursuing the program would need to take action at their city or board level, city council or board level, to submit 2 forms that are in your packet to PG&E. That doesn't commit you to the program, but it does authorize PG&E to release your energy data that will be used during the feasibility study. I want to say at the schedule, if you recall, Peninsula Clean Energy had a really aggressive schedule to have a report done by the end of the year, because there's a 1-year lag from submitting your report to the CPUC to when the program begins. I went back and challenged them on that a little bit, and they said it would just delay the benefit. So basically, if you don't make the December schedule to get your feasibility study, then you would submit it by the following December, and there would just be a 1-year delay. So it's just the window is December. And a delay would just delay the benefits that your residents could potentially receive through the program. There's no like critical cutoff or anything like that. And then lastly, I think, I highlighted in the staff report in me putting this together a couple of key issues that came up. One was, there's kind of 2 phases of how to move forward if anyone was interested. Reaching out to some of my colleagues and other COGs, and they received similar requests like this to consider something. None of them are organizing or doing anything at the regional level. In fact, in some instances that there has been some interest, those cities have done this on their own or are exploring it on their own, City of Stockton, City of Lodi in particular. And that's largely because the COGs don't have funding to even pay for the staff time to do something like this, even in the exploration phase. So one of the first things that came to my mind was, even at the $10,000 level, where would that contribution come from? Where would the staffing come from? Even in the exploration phase, if it was a regional if there was more than one entity. And then the second, of course, there's a larger discussion that doesn't have to be had now, but if there was interest, would this go to a new JPA or an existing JPA or a partnership with an existing community choice aggregation? So I tried to, that's a lot, I jammed it all in there, but I think the staff report was pretty thorough. So if there's any more questions, I can elaborate further.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Director.
After further research on my end, we don't need another government entity. I don't think this fits with our current staffing levels and everything. I don't have any interest in pursuing this any further.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think if jurisdictions, if they want to, can pursue it on their own, they can band together with other jurisdictions and do it. So I don't see it viable to come to MCAG as a program.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I also agree. I don't think we need another government agency. Delhi has Turlock Irrigation District, and a lot cheaper. In Livingston, years ago, we changed from PG&E on all the new developments went to MID. So half the town is MID, a lot cheaper. The whole part of the town is PG&E, and it's always more expensive. So last year, on the whole part of the town, I sold my house and I moved to the new development, and my new house is MID, and it's a lot cheaper. So sometimes it's even double. So compared to what the use is. But so like I said, we already have Merced Irrigation District or other districts depending on where you're at in the county. So I think the irrigation district is a lot cheaper. So thank you.
Yes, Director Murphy.
Yes, I'm interested in the idea of a CCA, but I don't think this is the right body for it. I do appreciate the value in having them come and give a presentation here, because there's representatives from all the city councils and county boards. But I do think it should probably be on it shouldn't be through this body. We shouldn't add on another but I am interested in it, and it actually doesn't impact any of the Merced Irrigation District by law. It can't interfere with that. It's only with public-owned utilities, so PG&E.
Yes, Director Valletta.
The Wright Solar Farm that they're talking about is by Billy Wright Dump, and they're putting in 640,000 panels. And so they are producing so much electricity that they can't dispose of that electricity in the Bay Area because people don't have air conditioning in the Bay Area. So that's why they're coming to us. And it's the only reason they're coming to us is because they want to sell their power all year round. And, economically and for what it's costing, I can't imagine what it's costing to put in that solar farm. And I agree with Director Murphy. I think if we're going to pursue that, we pursue this on a municipality by municipality basis. And then if two municipalities want to get together and talk about it, I think that's fine. But I think for this total group, and because we have the insertion of MID, that's just not going to work. That's just not going to work. So, I would be in favor of just letting the municipalities that want to do this investigate it, and then if they want to join together and form some kind of JPA, I think that would be the best process.
Okay, any other questions? Do you have enough direction?
What I'll do then is I will send an email to the governing board and to the TRB with the contacts for Peninsula Clean Energy. For those of you that are interested in continuing to discuss with them the concept, then you can do that on an individual basis.
Okay, that sounds.
Pay for the feasibility study, right? Yeah. Okay. I thought maybe Murphy and I could both forget that money, and then we can.
Hey, do we have to have a motion to do that? It says action.
No, because you're not pursuing it.
Okay. Item 22, approve the Transit Joint Powers Authority for Merced, approve the budget for 19 and 20 of the Transit Joint Powers. And Nav, you had a little rest, but not much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Previous month, the board took action on approving the budget for the 1920 year, but the staff report indicated it was 1819. So this is just correcting the staff report from 1819 to 1920 year. There's no change in the budget.
Any questions? Okay. We have a motion. Second. We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Item 23, submittal of Federal Transportation Administration buses and bus facilities program grant application for the acquisition of zero-emission electric buses.
So this is not Artis.
No.
I'm going to ask Maylee to introduce herself. She might be a new face to some of you.
Thank you. My name is Maylee Unruh. I'm the grants analyst, and I'll be presenting this item on behalf of Artis Smith, who couldn't be here today. Last month, the Federal Transit Administration released a discretionary funding opportunity for the buses and bus facilities program with over $423 million for fiscal year 2019. This grant program is intended to assist transit capital projects specifically for the replacement and purchase of buses, bus facilities, and bus-related equipment. This grant is very competitive, and staff is preparing an application to submit on behalf of TJPA for the purchase of 5 zero-emission electric buses and the depot chargers. This project was also submitted to the low-no emission vehicles program, which was brought to the board for approval back in April. So the Federal Transit Administration does coordinate between the two programs. So if in the event that TJPA is not successful through the low-no grant, our project here would actually still have an opportunity and be evaluated through the buses and bus facility program. We're asking for the board to approve the resolution and the letter of support. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Any questions?
If I could just add the breakdown of funding and funding types, and it's identical to what you approved in the previous application. So this is kind of our backup chance, or even potentially getting partially funded out of one and partially funded out of the other. But the actual the allocation or the funding plan you see in your staff report is a copy from what you approved in the earlier. It's an or, not an and. We would only be spending this money once, either in the first opportunity or the second.
Okay, any questions? If not, I'll look for a motion.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. You staying up there? Oh, we have somebody else comes pinch hitting. Authorized contract for the delivery of bulk fuel and lubricants for the new transit facility.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff is seeking board approval to enter a contract for bulk delivery fuel and lubricant for TJP Operation and Maintenance Facility, and also the fuel card system program, which will be providing service on the west side. The fuel card program will also serve as a backup plan in case those tanks fail. The staff determined that Vanderpool Enterprise was the lowest responsible bidder for the bulk fuel and delivery lubricant, and W.H. Bashir was the lowest responsible bidder for the fuel card program and backup. The differential is actually built into our budget for the 1920 year. So, any questions?
Any questions? If not, I'll look for a motion. We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, item 25, Transit Joint Powers Authority for Merced County Financial Report.
Just wondering where you were going.
Yeah.
He likes to make a
Oh, done. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. There's really nothing really standing out on the financials besides we received the LTF funds later in the year in January, so we haven't had the time to transfer the funds over to TJPA. That's the only thing that really stands out in the financials. Any questions?
Okay, no questions. Thank you.
Just the obvious question, why does it take so long to transfer money? I can do it like in 30 seconds on my phone.
Because
it's been months?
The funds actually come to the county first, so then we have to prepare documentations and submit it to the county, and then the county transfers the money over. So there's a step involved in there.
See, it's the county's fault.
Well, yeah. As soon as we get those submission forms, we'll act on it.
He has the button right there.
Thank you. Okay, item 26, disposing of surplus equipment.
I get to be artist now. This item, I'll start this off by saying that by the time we get back in this situation again, I'm setting myself up to say that we will have a policy that we will bring to this board so that we'll just know what we want to do moving forward, because we've been taking this one time at every time we have a bus to dispose of, we've been coming to the board. So we do have 9 2011 28-foot cutaway buses with lifts that are going to be retired from service soon. There is a defined useful life for these vehicles, which is 7 years or 200,000 miles, whichever is attained first. So the federal guidelines do allow us to dispose of these assets at less than fair market value if it has met its useful life. And the assets can also, we have a couple options. We can sell them or transfer them to another public agency for public use. And we've also have the opportunity to sell them at auction. I mean, it's fair, I think the dollar amount's about $1,500 to $5,000 a bus, but it's an auction, so it tends to be not the best return. So what we've done in the past, or I think in the last time we had buses to dispose of, is we asked the jurisdictions if there was an interest at the public agency level to have buses. I believe Livingston has been a recipient of buses in the past. So as I said, the direction we're trying to get from the board is how you'd like us to move forward. I think from staff recommendation, there's a couple different ways we can do it, but we can query the local jurisdictions if there's any interest. We know that Livingston has expressed some interest, and so has Yards, that they could use some of the older buses. If we see that we have too much demand, we can do a lottery system. We can establish some kind of a policy to make sure we're keeping track of who's getting what. But I think the staff, my recommendation would be we'd ask the public agencies to see if there's an interest in these retired buses, and then anything that was not taken over by public agency that we could auction off at that point.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I mean, I agree. I think we should make them available to the agencies. It doesn't matter who gives them. I think it's better because if it goes over $5,000, we send the money back to the federal government, and we don't want to do that. So we'd rather have a benefit to our agencies here in Merced County. So I agree with that. And like I said, just first dibs to the agencies and to whoever gets them. So thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I agree. Same. I think Livingston specifically has benefited a lot from those buses that have been given to our jurisdiction, especially for like a cadet and a program here in Livingston regarding the Livingston Police Department. So I would also suggest that we give the opportunity to those local jurisdictions.
Any other comments? Yes, Director Murphy.
I'm in agreement with the approach, and just wanted to mention the City of Merced may have interest in one. I've got a project in mind.
Okay.
Yes, Director Creighton.
So these buses are currently compliant, so they're not non-compliant, then being given to the jurisdictions for...
They're in use.
Okay, so...
They're in use. They're not retired yet, but they will be.
But they're compliant with California, all that. So if a jurisdiction was to pick it up, there would be no huge motor replacement for the PM2 and all the other stuff. It'd be... That's not been the case in the past, so I'm going to say no. Then if a jurisdiction did pick it up and they no longer need it, is there an obligation to give it back to MCAG? No. Okay.
Nope.
We have the flea market on Friday night.
Heck no.
Yeah.
Yeah, public comment, go ahead.
Thinking maybe Mayor Crane was going to make an RV out of it. I'm not sure, but good afternoon, Chair, Board. Just real quickly, 5 years ago, I became aware of the county surplusing some buses through our then Mayor Espinoza. We took the opportunity to take advantage of that, and we actually got 3 buses. Those buses have been a godsend for our youth and our programs. We've had the opportunity to take kids to Yosemite, to take kids to the movies, to take our explorers to Pebble Beach, to take our explorers to Laguna Seca. And one of the most memorable trips is I got a call from a friend from Yosemite Park, and he asked that we get 15 families with 4th graders up to Yosemite Park for a special program. He needed it done in a day. So I was able to get 15 families, and we took them to Yosemite to meet the President of the United States. Without those buses, that wouldn't have happened. And so they are truly a godsend. I would love to have 3 more. We actually have a mechanic who is a bus qualified mechanic who stays on top of the buses, maintains them, repairs them. We've called them out several times. When we had a bus breakdown, we had one that radiator leaked on the way to Monterey. He came out there, brought it, fixed it. We had another one that the transmission started making weird noises, but they're still useful, and we will still do what we can to keep them running and keep them involved in our programs in the city of Livingston. And so I appreciate the opportunity, and again, I'd love to have 3 more. So thank you.
Thank you.
I got another question. Looks like there's going to be a lot of interest between the jurisdictions. I think what the chief said, that's a great opportunity. We may explore that too. What policy or procedure will we do so that Atwater doesn't just get all the best buses like always?
Why don't I bring a proposed distribution, a policy in July? I first want to get us, we have 9, so we can see what the interest is for these 9 and see if we do have an oversubscription. But let me put some thought into that to make it because there's a couple of things I think we'll want to take into account, but we can put a little bit of thought into that and come back.
Are they all the big giant buses? Or
They're cutaways, so they're the
27
party buses.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Great.
Yeah.
If I can make one more comment, you do need a Class B driver with the pass endorsement, which we have. I am one, and we have other officers are, because we were very involved in the programs. And last time what we did was there was only interest by two cities, I think, and we ended up, he identified which ones are really good, and we just kind of went down the line and just basically took turns picking which we want. But I think for the most part they are maintained pretty well, and I think they're in good running condition. So, thank you.
Add a 1-year bumper-to-bumper warranty.
Okay, do you have enough direction?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now we'll move on to other reports. Let's start with the Executive Director's report.
I think technically that was an action.
Yeah, but just staff direction.
I'm okay with my direction.
Yeah, direction.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, Executive Director's report.
And I know this was going to be a long meeting, so I actually emailed out my Executive Director report to everybody before. I just failed to mention one thing. We are working on procuring a consultant to do some diversion assistance. So basically have a consultant on everything you heard Rob Hilton talk about, these compliance of 1383 and other jurisdictions having to do blue bins, and what are we going to do next with our recycling program and the organics and composting and all of those state regulations. We're bringing on a consultant to essentially be an extension of our staff, to be the experts that can be out working with you in your individual jurisdictions to try to figure out how we want to handle the 1383 compliance, whether it's individually or as a region, and to be able to walk through those options. So we're going to be out, if that's not out on the street yet, it should be this summer very soon. And once we have that consultant on, we'll make sure that they're here and get a chance to meet with you all, and then will be some assistance to your teams as you link your local collection to the regional disposal part. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Director's report. Let's start with Director Creighton.
Nothing.
Director Murphy.
Nothing to report. Is this the time where we talk about future items for an agenda? Yeah. So there's been discussion in the past about the composition of the MCAG board, and I'd like to have an agendized item to talk about that in terms of how the membership is allocated.
Hey, Director Aguiar.
I have nothing to report, but I agree with having that on the agenda and for discussion.
Director Lohr.
Thank you. I had to step out earlier. I went to celebrate our public health department's accreditation. Merced County is one of 11 health departments accredited this year, 15th out of 61 in California, and the first in the San Joaquin Valley. So I stepped out to join staff in celebrating that. I also wanted to let folks know that I will be absent from the Measure V East Side. I serve on the Central California Alliance for Health as one of the commissioners, and I cannot miss that board meeting. Thank you.
Director Villado.
Thank you. Yes, I also support Director Murphy's request for the reorganization. Also, I failed to mention that the $5 million that we received, MCAG was instrumental in helping us do that today, or helping us secure that money. So I didn't want to leave them out and thank them also. Thank you.
Director Pereira.
Yes. On item 18 that we passed today, could I get a breakdown of the $6.1 million request for operating for that was in that item? Not now, but emailed to me.
For the transit budget?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Director McGlynn.
I'd like to personally thank MCAG for coming to Dos Palos for the Senior Awards Breakfast. They awarded a scholarship. We had many, many worthy students that graduated, so it was just really nice to see that. And recently, Palos had their annual car show, the Eagle-filled drags, and the Eagle-filled fly-in. They were all very well attended, and many people from outside municipalities. So I think it's great when all of us can support others' communities. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Director Espinoza.
Thank you. I also like to agendize live streaming our meetings through Facebook, like the county has, and other cities. I think that we need to be transparent, like we were saying earlier, and I think it's important because we spend a lot of money, the citizens' money, especially having to do with roads and all that we're doing. So I think they'd be good for the public to see that, and also too for changing of the times of the meetings from 3 to at least 5 or 6 o'clock at night, so that the citizens can also see. So thank you.
Yeah.
Just to let you know that we're in the process of recruiting the multimedia specialist position that we had in the budget that you approved, and that person will be spearheading our effort to have all of our meeting locations recorded, including Gustine and Dos Palos. And then I think that is a natural project as well. Is to our goal is to make our meetings, right now they're all recorded and put on that we can and put on YouTube, but to have something more readily accessible. So that's something we'll be exploring.
Director McDaniel. Nothing to report. Counselor. All I would like to say is everybody have a safe and sane 4th. Gustine will be having their fireworks for the 105th year. And also on the 29th, we have a color run set up. So far, there's already over 300 entrants. And if you've never seen a color run, it's fun, especially my job. I get to stand at a station and douse people with all sorts of color. And that's a lot of fun. And with that, we have to go to item 29, election of chair and vice chair for next year.
I can just offer, I included in the packet the rotation schedule that has been the guide for this process over the last couple of years. Actually, I think since this was developed when I was interim 2 years ago. So based on the proposed schedule, the chair for the 1920 year would be a representative from the county, and Supervisor McDaniel is currently serving as the board's vice chair. And then Atwater would be nominated or up for the nomination for vice chair for this coming 1920 year.
Second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes. Who said?
Lloyd.
Lloyd. Opposed? Motion carried. Congratulations. And with that,
Before you close the meeting, I just want to thank Joe for doing such a good job of keeping these meetings going and keeping us all level-headed and in a normal process. And staff had no complaints, so I assume that went well too. So
hey, we got
thanks,
through it.
Joe.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for coming. All 7 of you that stayed through the whole thing.
I was going to say, your technology, I found out the intersection will be completed by December. Most of the work we've done.
This is all I have to sign.
Does it look like a paycheck, Joe?